Today we are going to speak about Queen Elizabeth I, Mary's sister, but of course from another mother. Elizabeth's mother is called Anne Boleyn. If you remember, Henry VIII, Elizabeth's father, changed the religion of England from Catholicism to Protestantism in order to marry Anne Boleyn. Her reign actually started from 1558 to 1603. The sun had not yet risen when Mary passed away. Within a few hours, Elizabeth had been proclaimed queen. There was no objection raised in England against her. Heath, Mary's chancellor and Archbishop of York, announced her accession to the Houses of Parliament. The proclamation was drawn up by Sir William Cecil, the council's secretary under Edward VI. Sir William Cecil is an important figure during the reign of Elizabeth I. In fact, the only alternative to Elizabeth was the Queen of Scots. Her accession would mean virtually the conversion of England into an appanage of France. Here the writer is explaining why the English people accepted Elizabeth as their queen despite being announced as illegitimate before, because the other option was Mary, Queen of Scots, okay, and she is married to a French prince. So if she holds the throne of England, then probably England would become joined to France, and they become one kingdom, the kingdom of France and England. So this is why she was rejected by most English people. Of Elizabeth's subjects, none, whatever their creed might be, or whatever creed she might adopt, would be prepared to rebel at the price of subjection to France. For the same reason, do what you do, Philip II could not afford to act against Elizabeth. More than that, he had no choice but to interfere on her behalf if Henry of France acted against her. So even Philip II of Spain, despite being a devout Catholic and the previous husband of her sister Mary I, he would not take any action against Elizabeth because he is afraid from France, because France could support England in order to fight Spain. Mary Stuart's claim presented no immediate danger, though it might become dangerous enough in the future. So until this period, there is no danger that Mary of Scots could become the Queen of England, though she is going to be a threat to Elizabeth later on. There were two things then on which Elizabeth knew she could count: her own ability to keep her head and the capacity for loyalty of the great bulk of her subjects. Elizabeth was a strong character. She has confidence in her ability to rule the kingdom, and she has faith in her people. If either of those failed her, she would have no one but herself to blame. The former had been shrewdly tested during her sister's reign, when a single false step would have ruined her. Before, during Mary's reign, if she was not a strong and independent character and a shrewd character, maybe she would have failed and maybe she would have been dead by now. But because she's shrewd and wise, she was able to continue until she became the Queen of England. The latter, referring to her people, had borne the strain even of the Marian persecution, were able to bear what Mary did, and we mean by the persecution and the oppression that took place during Mary's reign when she killed Protestants. So, as we said before, the latter had borne the strain even of the Marian persecution, of the alarm engendered by the Spanish marriage, which showed, incidentally, that fear of domination by a foreign power was the most deeply rooted of all popular sentiments, a sentiment now altogether in Elizabeth's favor, unless she should threaten a dangerous marriage. So the people are afraid that Elizabeth would marry a foreign prince and that he would become the King of England. So they have no problem with Elizabeth in her position without a husband until now. Throughout the last reign, Cecil had carefully effaced himself. In matters of religion, though he had been previously associated with Protestant leaders, he had never personally committed himself to any extreme line. And under the reaction he conformed, as did Elizabeth herself and practically the whole of the nobility. Here we're talking about Sir William Cecil, is that he was a wise and shrewd person just like Elizabeth, and this is probably why Elizabeth considered him a person to be trusted and her counselor, because though he was known to be Protestant, he didn't show and didn't go into any extreme line during the reign of Mary the First. On the other hand, Cecil never betrayed confidences. He was not to be bought, and he was not to be frightened. Further, he was endowed with a penetrating perception of character. He has the ability to see beyond, and he has immense powers of organization and industry, which was absolutely indefatigable. He's a person to depend on. He's wise, he's shrewd, he knows how to take matters of or issues of administrating the government. It was an immediate mark of the young queen's singular sagacity that even before her accession she had selected Cecil to lean upon, to depend upon, in preference to any of the great nobles. And please, you are going to have to write a short note on Sir William Cecil. Secure of her throne, Elizabeth was confronted by problems. The first problem, Elizabeth was confronted by the great domestic problem of effecting a religious settlement. Now, the English people are thinking, what is Elizabeth going to do about the religion of the country? Because until now the country is still Catholic, and as Elizabeth is known to be, she is Protestant. Second problem, the diplomatic problem of terminating the French war. Elizabeth has to end the war between France and Spain, and also the relationship between France and England is going to improve if the relationship between England and Spain is no longer in harmony. Third problem, the personal problem of choosing or evading a husband. Who is Elizabeth going to choose as a husband? Is she going to marry Philip II of Spain? Is she going to marry a foreign prince? This is an important problem because the public are waiting to know who is the suitor possible for Elizabeth. Fourth problem, the rehabilitation of the finances of the national credit. As you know, England is in great debt, and Mary I has not done anything to improve the financial conditions in England. So Elizabeth is faced with the problem that the treasury is empty. Going back to the problem of the possible suitors for Elizabeth, Philip of Spain and his representatives in England had not realized the true strength of Elizabeth's position. They didn't think that Elizabeth was strong enough to face them, and certainly had no suspicion that she and her advisors were entirely alive to it. On this point, they had absolutely no misgivings. They took it for granted that the English Queen must place herself in their hands and meekly obey their behests, if only in order to secure Spanish support against France. They believed that Elizabeth is a weak queen, that she would obey them, and them here referring to Spain, so they don't have any misgivings that Elizabeth is going to stand up to them. Philip began operations by proposing himself as her husband. He's acting as if she's going to accept him as a husband, expecting thereby to obtain for himself a far greater degree of power than he had derived from his union with her sister, while inviting her to share the throne of the first power in Europe. Philip thinks that she is going to accept him as a husband and that he's going to give her a share in ruling both the kingdoms of Spain and England. But Elizabeth and Cecil were alive to the completeness of the hold on Philip they already possessed. However, the Queen's argument that the marriage, however attractive to herself or desirable politically, was far from her point of view out of the question was answerable. Of course, Elizabeth did not ever think of marrying Philip. When Philip's hand was definitely declined 3 months after Elizabeth's accession, the most pressing danger arising out of the marriage question was at an end. When finally Philip was certain that Elizabeth would not marry him, he began to prepare himself that probably England would not be on good terms with Spain during the next period. The measures taken in the government during the reign of Elizabeth. The methods of the new government, however, were to be strictly legal. Changes must have parliamentary sanction. They should be authorized by the Parliament. At the coronation, the authorized forms obtained, but at the end of January, the Houses met, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and during the following 4 months, the whole of the Marian legislation was wiped out, as Mary had wiped out the legislation of the preceding reign. So now anything related to the government during Mary's reign is now wiped out. The first measures brought forward were financial. Of course, as we said, that the treasury was empty, as the first step Cecil had taken was to dispatch an agent to the Netherlands cities to negotiate a loan, to agree upon a loan, a tonnage and boundage bill, a subsidy, and a first fruits bill were to face the emptiness of the treasury. These bills were skillfully introduced and well received, for it was expected that the money would be expended where it was needed on national defense. Next, the new Act of Supremacy was introduced. The actual title of Supreme Head was not revived, but a different formula was used, the crown being declared supreme in all causes as well as ecclesiastical as civil. So now Queen Elizabeth is called supreme in all fields, whether religious fields or civil fields, because during Mary's reign she has changed the title Supreme Head because the one who was in supreme rule was the Pope in Rome. Now England is a Protestant country, so the Pope has no influence upon England, and that Elizabeth is the supreme in all causes as well as ecclesiastical as civil. Also, the acts related to heresy acts that were activated during Mary's reign have been cancelled. And when we refer to the heresy acts which gave Mary and her government the right to suppress and oppress the Protestants. In the meantime, the prayer book had been undergoing a final revision, and here Elizabeth's own wish would undoubtedly have been to revert to that of 1549. If you remember, the prayer book was introduced by Edward VI in 1549. The Act of Uniformity imposing the use of the prayer book on the clergy. This is a new law, okay? What happened when the prayer book was imposed, meaning that the clergy are forced to use that or to depend on that book? It resulted in the resignation, which according to the records did not exceed 200. The next important act was the recognition of the Queen, which declared her to be the lawful sovereign by blood, and repealed in general terms all acts or judgments passed in a contrary sense. So if there was any law saying that Elizabeth was illegitimate, this has been repealed, meaning that this is cancelled. Now she is the rightful queen. She is sovereign by blood.